Before Genesis begins, before the Spirit hovers over the waters, before the words, "Let there be light," are ever spoken, something else existed. Not darkness, not chaos, but beings. Beings with no names in our Bibles, no faces in our imagination, and yet they were there. Ancient voices, erased from Scripture, once called them the forgotten sons of God. They were not angels. They were not men. They were something else entirely, firstborns of a realm that was hidden before the heavens were stretched out. And the most chilling part, they were created in the image of God. Genesis opens with light, but these beings existed before light was ever formed. They walked in something older than illumination, something that even angels never entered. When God created them, he didn't say, "Let there be a taste," because they weren't called into existence like the rest of creation. They emerged from his intention. They were not messengers. They were not warriors. They were sons, formed from a relationship that predates even time. So why were they erased? What did they do to be forgotten so completely that even the prophets dared not speak their names? That's the terrifying part, because some ancient texts suggest they didn't fall like Lucifer. They didn't rebel in fire and rage. Their disobedience was quieter. It was the act of walking away, of detaching themselves from the very one who gave them breath, not in defiance, but in independence. They chose their own truth, and that was enough to be cast into silence forever. What if everything you know about the beginning is missing something? A truth too ancient to fit in Genesis, a story erased before the angels were even formed. Today, you're about to discover the forgotten sons of God, beings who walked with the Creator before time began and were never mentioned again. If this truth burns in your soul, don't just watch. Like this video, subscribe and turn on the notifications. And tell us in the comments, which city are you watching from? We want to know where this revelation is reaching. The Bible speaks of sons of God in the book of Job, who rejoiced when the foundations of the earth were laid. But who were they rejoicing over if Adam had not yet been made? And what if some of them weren't rejoicing at all, but watching in bitterness? What if they saw the creation of man not as a miracle, but as a replacement? According to fragments hidden among the Dead Sea Scrolls, there were those who had once walked with the Creator, and when they saw man being formed from dust, they remembered what they had lost. These sons of God weren't limited by space or time. They moved in ways that even the angels could not comprehend. While the heavenly hosts sang in order and submission, these beings flowed with something else, something unstructured, intimate, and raw. They carried within them the unfiltered presence of the Creator. But with that closeness came a danger. They began to believe they were not just sons, but equals. And from that belief came their silence. Unlike Lucifer, who cried out, "I will ascend," these beings didn't shout. They simply stepped back. They stopped reflecting. They no longer responded to God's presence with joy, but with stillness, cold stillness. And in heaven, silence is louder than rebellion. So God withdrew, not in anger, but in sorrow. And slowly, deliberately, their names were sealed, so that no memory of them would remain in the records of man. But they didn't vanish completely. Traces of them echo through ancient Jewish writings, where rabbis hinted at firstborns of glory who walked among the rivers of fire before the firmament was stretched. In one mystical song preserved among the scrolls, a line reads, "They turned their faces from the source and were scattered like wind." Who were these beings, so powerful that even their forgetfulness echoes across time? One passage from the Book of Enoch, often rejected yet deeply revealing, mentions the sons who were before the Watchers. This suggests a category of beings older than even the fallen angels we call the Watchers. If true, then the rebellion of Genesis 6 was not the first betrayal, but a repetition. A mirror of something that had already happened before. A rebellion of beings not cast into hell, but into obscurity. In the ancient rabbinic text, Sefer HaRazim, there is mention of a group called the Sons Before Radiance, a poetic phrase, but one that scholars have never been able to trace. It describes beings that walked in purity before the throne was even established, not as worshippers, but as witnesses. They saw the foundations of creation take form, and yet they did not sing. They only watched, and some of them, the text hints, refused to bow. Not out of pride, but because they remembered a glory they once had and couldn't accept a new order without them. These forgotten sons may have played a role far greater than we realize. Some mystics believe they were the original bearers of divine knowledge, carrying truths that would later be distorted by fallen angels. Before Enoch walked with God, before Adam named the animals, these beings knew the patterns of the stars, the language of light, and the boundaries of the unseen. But when they departed, they took that knowledge with them. That's why even today we feel echoes, mysteries too deep for explanation, as if a wisdom was buried long before mankind took its first breath. And here lies the danger. If such beings existed, and were, erased, what else have we not been told? What truths were hidden to protect the fragile understanding of later generations? Theologians often dismiss these ideas as poetic metaphors or heretical myths. But the question remains, why do so many independent traditions, Jewish, Christian, even early Mesopotamian, mention firstborn divine beings who vanished before the world began? Coincidence or censorship? One lost Aramaic scroll tells of 7 thrones that were abandoned and sons who sang no more. This phrase haunts scholars. Why would a throne be abandoned in heaven? Thrones are not symbols, they are assignments. If sons abandoned them, it means they held real power and real responsibility. And if those thrones were never reclaimed, it means their fall left a vacancy, one that would shape everything that followed, from the rebellion of Lucifer to the temptation in Eden, and perhaps even to the war that is still to come. The idea of thrones left empty in heaven suggests something even more disturbing, that the spiritual hierarchy we know today is incomplete. What if the angelic orders, cherubim, seraphim, dominions, were created not as a complete system, but as a response, a replacement, to fill the void left by these sons who walked away? Their absence changed the architecture of the divine. It forced a restructuring of the heavens. What was once a family became a system. What was once intimate became hierarchical. And then came man, formed from dust, filled with breath, but placed into a world already marked by loss. Genesis says that God created man in his image, but many scholars have asked, why the plural? Let us make man in our image. Was God speaking to the angels, or was he speaking to those original sons, beings who had already borne his likeness? If man was made in response to their departure, then humanity carries not just God's fingerprint, but a purpose, to redeem a broken lineage. This would explain the jealousy of the serpent. If the serpent was once close to the throne, perhaps even a witness to the forgotten sons, then watching God breathe life into dust would have been unbearable. Not because man was powerful, but because man was chosen. The serpent did not tempt Eve out of curiosity. It was retaliation. A silent war had already begun, long before the fruit was touched. The fall of man, then, was not the beginning of rebellion. It was the continuation. The battlefield had shifted from heaven to earth, but the war was ancient. Humanity stepped into a story already in progress, and this explains why certain beings, those called sons of God in Genesis 6, sought out the daughters of men. They were not just angels falling in lust. They were remnants, echoes of a former order trying to regain what was lost by merging with human blood. If these ancient suns could no longer operate in the heavens, then perhaps their only path back was through humanity, through influence, through legacy. This gives a new weight to the strange hybrid offspring mentioned in Genesis, the Nephilim, not merely giants, but failed attempts to restore a lost connection, not demons, not angels, but something in between. The result of a union never meant to happen. A desperate move from beings that once walked in perfect light. Some ancient Jewish mystics believed that God allowed humanity to be tested not only by Satan, but by forgotten forces from a previous creation. Forces that whispered knowledge, pride, and confusion. This could explain why certain ideas, like forbidden knowledge, cosmic rebellion, and divine memory, appear across so many civilizations. It's not just myth, it's trauma, echoes from a forgotten war that humanity unknowingly inherited. And what if that war never ended? What if the silence of the forgotten sons was not the end of their story, but just a pause? Some theologians argue that the end times described in Revelation are not only a battle between good and evil, but a final reckoning with those who were removed before time began, a return of the sons who never bowed, not in glory, but in judgment, to reclaim what they once lost, or to be judged for walking away from the eternal light. A passage in the book of 2nd Esdras mentions a time when the hidden ones shall speak, and those erased shall be seen once more. Scholars rarely discuss this line, but it hints at a terrifying possibility, that the names sealed long ago could be unsealed again, that their silence may end, and if these beings return, will they come to restore what was broken or to challenge the order that replaced them? The book of Revelation describes scrolls being opened, names being revealed, and voices from beyond time echoing once again. While most interpret this as a reference to future judgment or the Lamb's Book of Life, some ancient commentaries suggest a second layer, a scroll that was never part of man's history but of heaven's, a record of those who came first, the sons of God who were erased. What if one of the scrolls to be opened in the end contains their names and their purpose? This could explain why certain themes reappear in apocalyptic visions: stars falling, thrones trembling, silence in heaven. These aren't just poetic symbols. They are callbacks to a time when beings greater than angels fell without noise. And if silence was their rebellion, then perhaps noise, revelation, is their restoration. But not all returns are welcome. If they come back, they may not recognize the world as it is now. They may not see humanity as rightful heirs, but as intruders in a kingdom they once held. This raises a troubling question. Are we being prepared for their return or for their judgment? Could the spiritual warfare that believers sense today, the pressure, the confusion, the division, be signs that an older power is stirring, something deeper than demons, more ancient than Satan, a presence that was sealed for millennia, now pressing against the edge of time? And what role will God assign to us when those forgotten voices rise again? Some say these ideas are too dangerous, too speculative, but throughout history the Church has often buried what it feared, and silence has a cost. Perhaps these sons were hidden not only for our protection, but also for their own redemption. If so, then we may yet see the day when what was forgotten is remembered, when what was erased is restored, and when those who walked away from the light are finally called to face it again. In the writings of early desert mystics, there are warnings, not about demons, but about beings of brilliance who carry no allegiance. These cryptic references describe presences that do not serve the kingdom of darkness or the kingdom of light. They simply watch, observe, wait. Many believe these are whispers of the forgotten sons, neither fallen in the traditional sense nor holy in the way we understand it. Their silence, their detachment, makes them more unsettling than even the known enemies of God. It's possible that their great error wasn't rebellion, but absence. They didn't fight God. They didn't side with Satan. They simply disappeared, turned away from their calling. And in doing so, they opened a spiritual void, one that echoes to this day. Some believers feel it in their prayer life, a strange resistance, a spiritual static, a shadow with no name. Could this be the residue of those early sons? Could we be living under the consequences of a heavenly vacancy that has never truly been filled? What would it mean then if part of humanity's role is to take their place, to become not just creations, but true sons and daughters of God in a deeper, eternal sense? Paul writes in Romans that all creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. Perhaps this revealing isn't just about salvation, it's about replacement, about restoration. We are not just saved from sin, we are being shaped to step into something that was lost long before Eden. If that's true, then the spiritual battle is far bigger than personal morality or daily struggle. It's cosmic, ancient. We're walking in the middle of a war we didn't start, but we might be called to finish. The story of the forgotten sons of God is not just a mystery buried in time. It may be the key to understanding why you were born, why your spirit longs for something it can't name, and why heaven, even now, watches to see who will rise. We often imagine heaven as a place of perfect order where nothing ever changes. But the story of the forgotten sons challenges that. It suggests that even in the heavenly realms there was movement, choice, loss, and silence. The throne room of God may have once echoed with voices that no longer speak. And perhaps the very reason God created mankind was not only to begin something new, but to heal something ancient, a spiritual fracture that existed long before sin entered the garden. In that light, every believer's journey takes on a deeper weight. Your struggle isn't just about surviving this world. It may be about participating in a restoration older than creation. When you worship, when you choose obedience, when you reflect God's image in love and humility, you are doing what those first sons refused to do. You're stepping into the song they never sang. That's why your walk matters more than you think. It echoes into realms you cannot see. But the question still lingers, where are they now? If they were erased, are they truly gone? Or are they simply hidden, waiting for a moment only God knows? Some ancient texts speak of a veil within the veil, a layer of reality that exists beyond angels, beyond demons, a realm of watchers who do not interfere. Not yet. If the forgotten sons dwell there, then the final chapters of Revelation may not only reveal Christ's return, but theirs. And what if their return is not physical, but spiritual? What if their influence begins to stir again, not through appearances, but through ideas, systems, movements, the rise of knowledge without humility, power without worship, identity without submission? These are not new evils. They are echoes of an ancient silence. And the church now more than ever must be awake, because the ones who vanished may not be gone, and their legacy may still be unfolding. Scripture warns us about doctrines of demons and false revelations, but what about forgotten truths? Not lies, but memories too dangerous to keep. The story of the forgotten sons of God may not be told plainly in the Bible, but its shadow stretches across every sacred page. In every exile, every silence, every divine restructuring, we glimpse their absence. Their story is the outline behind the curtain, never spoken, but always felt. Some believe this silence is mercy, that God, in His infinite grace, chose not to destroy them, but to seal them, not out of wrath, but out of hope. Hope that one day another race, one born of dust and spirit, might succeed where they failed. And maybe that's why the enemy hates us, not because we are powerful, but because we are potential, because God looks at broken, flawed humans and says, "I will dwell in them," a declaration he may have once made to others. It is no coincidence that Jesus is called the firstborn of all creation. That title matters. It is a declaration of rank, of restoration. In him, God places a new son at the center of heaven, a son who would never walk away. And in him, we are adopted, not just rescued from darkness, but inserted into a story far older than we knew. Jesus doesn't just save us, he reclaims the throne room, fills the emptiness left by those who were forgotten. This is the true weight of our calling. We are not just saved individuals, we are a spiritual inheritance, a living response to a heavenly silence. And while the world looks for signs in the sky, maybe the real sign is within, a heart that still chooses God. A voice that sings where others refused, a soul that says, "Here I am," while others disappeared. This is not just your story, it is heaven's unfinished sentence, and your faith may be the final word. Perhaps this is why the enemy fights hardest not against angels, but against believers. Because every time a son or daughter of God stands in truth, it echoes in places we cannot see. It disrupts the silence. It shakes ancient thrones. You may feel small, ordinary. But if you carry the Spirit of God, you are more dangerous than you realize. You are part of the answer to a mystery that began before Genesis, and heaven has not forgotten. So when you pray, you are speaking into realms older than time. When you worship, you are singing in place of those who never did. When you obey, you are walking paths once abandoned. And when you fall, but rise again in grace, you are rewriting what they could not finish. The forgotten sons of God may never return, but through Christ in us, a new generation rises, not of memory, but of fulfillment. And maybe that's the true redemption. Not that those ancient beings are restored, but that something better takes their place, something willing, something humble, something born not of glory, but of mercy. In the end, God didn't choose the brightest or the first. He chose the broken, the overlooked, the dust, and to that dust he gave a destiny the heavens themselves tremble to witness. If this truth burns in your heart, don't let it go. You were not born by accident. You are not walking in this world without purpose. The silence of the past echoes through time, but your voice was made to answer it. You are a child of God, not forgotten, not erased, but called for this very moment. And if you feel that, then like those who watch from beyond the veil, heaven is watching you now. If this message stirred something deep inside you, it wasn't just information. It was a call to remember what heaven never forgot. You were born for a purpose that began before time itself. So don't keep this truth to yourself. Like this video, share it with someone you know needs to hear it, and subscribe if you haven't yet. We're building a community that's waking up to the spiritual reality behind the veil, and you're part of it. Tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Let's make the silence echo again.